Alex Venezia, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you again. We go back a little ways. I think first time we met
Yeah,
was, what was that? 10 years ago? Was it that long ago?
maybe not a whole 10, but
It's
close.
getting there. Yeah, yeah. And that
Yeah.
it was at a workshop you actually took from me, and then you went off and became a better painter.
hmm
So better painter than me. So
No.
I think you, I think you sort of threw away everything I tried to teach you and said, no, no, I got a better way.
Oh man. Oh no,
No, that was,
definitely not.
I have to share, I have to share with the audience how that went down at the workshop. So first of all, you didn't throw everything away because you were a great student. So just to clear that up, you were an awesome student at the workshop. But I
Thank
remember,
you.
and correct me if I'm remembering wrong, but I remember we were
hmm
outside. We were at Garen
Yeah.
Baker's studio where the workshop was, and we're outside. And I just remember telling you, dude, you just got to start doing this career thing because you are freaking amazing. And you were pretty insecure about it back then. I remember feeling like you weren't sure about yourself, whether you could make
Probably.
it. Yeah, and my gosh, you had some chops, and obviously they've only gotten better from there.
No, yeah, that was fun. I always recall a certain moment when I'm talking to people, like students and stuff, whatever, that there was a point where you came up to my painting and you were like, you can paint this muted all you want, like after my workshop, but for right now, we're going to try and add some color in. And you just came up and you added like this bright green and bright blue and bright red in these spots. And then I looked up at the model and I actually saw, what you put down. And from that point, like this, something clicked about this sort of hatching and weaving of colors to find the right color or to make a realistic flesh tone.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad I
But
was able to
anyway,
help you in some way. I
oh
appreciate
man,
that.
I tell everyone to take your workshop.
I appreciate that. Yeah, well, your work has just blossomed. I mean, it's unbelievable what you've accomplished. I mean, you're in Arcadia Gallery now, you're having solo shows. I'm assuming everything is selling. I mean, congrats on all of your success.
Thank you.
But I want to hear, I know a little bit about your background. I know you sort of learned by jumping around from
hmm
workshop to workshop, but tell me more about this journey you've taken from childhood till today.
Yeah, okay. Let me see where I should start.
You can
Well, I
start a
mean, like
little
most,
after birth, just a little after birth.
yeah,
Yeah.
just a little bit. I mean, I was, as a kid, always interested in drawing and coloring and being artistic, but it was nothing better than any other, little kid. Um, so I was always drawing and stuff, and it, I mean, it was nothing really past that until high school. I had an art teacher, Edward Obermeyer, who in his class, he kind of saw that I was really interested in it, and he kind of let me do whatever I wanted as long as I turned in the assignments on time. So there were specific assignments that all the students had to do, but then he kind of was like, "Yeah, if you're working on that, do that, but just turn it in on time." So he let me do what I wanted, and he showed me. He was doing a sort of a lecture on chiaroscuro and brought up Caravaggio. And when I saw Caravaggio for the first time, that's when I was like, whoa,
Hmm.
is that like, what is that? You know? And it's like, oh, okay, it's oil paint. Can people still paint like that today?
Wait, was that your first
And
exposure to
he gave me,
classical painters? Or because Caravaggio is kind of surprising to me that that's who your first inspiration
yeah,
was. Or was that just your first classical painter that you saw?
yes.
Okay, okay. So you had no
So it was,
experience
I
with
mean,
classical art up until that point, until you saw Caravaggio.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've been to a museum, but it was, you know, and I will say now that I'm remembering, before that, like let's say right before that, I was really big into like the skateboard community and sort of going to shows like music. And so I really liked art that I thought was cool, like graphic designs on skateboards and graffiti and stuff like that.
Right.
And then when I saw Caravaggio for the first time, I was like, okay, no, this is not just cool. This is emotional, and poetic. And I was like, how can I do that? And then I expressed that to my art teacher, and he gave me a whole set of oil paint.
Wow.
Like just, yeah, and a palette and everything. And he, yeah, kind of introduced me to it. And then from there, I went to a university for one semester because I thought you just don't know. So you're like, okay, go to an art school. That's what will teach me how to do art. But then obviously they didn't. So I dropped out and I took my first workshop in like a local gallery in Virginia Beach. And that artist showed me, I think that's where I was introduced to Jeremy Lipking and Nelson Shanks and a lot of the people who were alive doing it. And that's when I realized I could kind of actually go out and learn from these people.
So how did you know, how did you come to create this workshop education, or was it more than that? Did you do something else besides workshops?
No, so I remember after I dropped out and I took that first workshop, I was thinking, where should I go study? And I was looking at like Angel Academy in Italy, and then Florence Academy and Studio Incominati and GCA. And after looking through all of them, first I realized I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, because I'm like, okay, can I move to New York City? Can I move to Italy and be able to afford that in tuition? And I went as far as actually applying to Grand Central and getting an interview with Jacob Collins and getting accepted. But then once I was accepted, it kind of hit me like, oh wait, I have no idea how I could do this.
Yeah.
And I had a bit of an inkling that looking at all of the student work from all these schools, that I didn't want to be exactly like one school.
Right.
And so it was also really hard for me to decide at that point. So I think I kept pushing off deciding where to study. And in between that, I just kept taking workshops and then realized it was working. And in between workshops, I mean, I was just always doing my own paintings and taking what I learned from the workshop and applying it. And yeah.
So who are some of the artists you took workshops with?
Well, first was this artist, John De La Vega, and my friend, these are like the local, but some of the more prominent ones. First, I took one from Darren Kingsley from Studio Incominati. And then I've taken a figure drawing workshop from Colleen Barry. I've taken Michael Klein's workshop, a flower painting workshop from him, a Daniel Sprick interior painting workshop. I mean, I spent a couple months at Odd Nerdrums, but this is not in order. Obviously, your workshop. I took a workshop from Casey Bao really early on. Yeah.
Wow, those are some big artists.
Any other ones, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the Odd Nerdrum thing. How did you end up studying with Odd Nerdrum?
You can see over my shoulder, everyone is going out to lunch.
I'm sorry, man.
Oh, no. Everyone, oh, no, I'm not saying that I'm hungry or something. Just for people listening, the fact that I'm in East Oak Studio right now and there's like 5 other artists working in this
that's a pretty
building,
cool
and they all
environment.
just went out to lunch. So yes, Odd Nerdrum. when I saw Odd's work, I was like, this is the only guy at the time. I was like, oh, this is the only guy still alive that can paint like an old master.
Mm-hmm.
I need to go study with him. Is that possible? And then I just looked at his website and it was like, send us an email with like 3 images of your work or something and why you want to come. And to my surprise, they actually, responded and said, you can come in the fall or whatever. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to Norway. And I mean, that was just a wild experience. I could just start describing it, but
no, let's hear about it. Let's hear about it. I want to hear about it. I'm sure a lot of people who look up to Odd Nerdrum would love to hear what an experience like that is like.
Yeah, well, it was funny because they kept switching up where they were telling me to fly into, because he has a studio in Norway, but then he also has a studio that was being built in Sweden. And the studio in Sweden was supposed to be built by the time I got there. And it wasn't, but I flew into Sweden. So for like a whole week, it was just me and Odd's wife in this like big empty house in Sweden until like Odd and his sons came from Norway and like came and like picked me up and brought me back. So I was just chilling with his wife in a house that had his paintings all laying around. So I kind of just got to spend time with the paintings. Like there's this huge painting, like life size, called Five Singing Women. And it was just like in their garage. And I would just go like sit on the floor in the garage and look at it like, I'm in Sweden. This is so weird. But then, yeah, so then I went to Norway. With them, we drove. And then I met all the students. That's where I met Divya. And yeah, I mean, it was just crazy. It's very old worldly. Like you feel like you're walking into like a candlelit cave. I arrived at night, and then like their family are wearing like all old clothing.
Really?
But I mean, so then like the dynamic with the students, there's like a separate house that's where the students live and Odd Studio is. And so I was living there. There was the Odd Studio and then the student studio. You could kind of walk in between. And everyone was kind of doing self-portraits or trying to do like their take on a narrative painting. And then you could just watch Odd paint every day. And he would have students model and stuff in exchange and like prepare his canvases and stuff. And the most incredible thing of the whole experience was to see him take like a little, like just almost, it looked like a doodle, just like these kind of scribbles of figures, and take that and then make it into a life-size narrative painting. And just seeing how you went from something so simple to something so grand and complicated with the, wardrobe and making up the background, and how he would pose the figures to fit his drawing. He wasn't, just copying whatever he put in front of him.
Right.
And I could get more specific with specific questions, but it was great.
Yeah. So how much do you think that affected your painting, studying with Odd?
I think that because it was right after that point that I feel like I fine-tuned my aesthetic into a cohesive body of work, whereas before that point, every now and then I would hit something that was like, this feels like how I want to paint, but then I would paint something else. I'm like, who let me paint that? Why did I paint that? And it would just kind of bounce everywhere. And then going to Odds, and then directly from Odds, I came to East Oaks, which at that point was Michael, Klein, Joshua LaRock, and Lewis Carr. And being in that environment then with all of the kind of artwork around and beauty, something I think clicked in form of aesthetic and mood that I was looking for. And maybe it was just being surrounded by it and seeing it being created. Yeah. And then I think that I keep going back to things that I've seen him do there as I progress more and more in my art making, because I'm trying to more come up with an idea, sketch it out, and then use the model as a supplement to my idea instead of being a slave to everything that's in front of me.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I keep kind of going back in my mind to what I saw Odd do, because I think it was the closest to what a lot of old masters were doing when they were coming up with ideas that clearly weren't there in front of them. So yeah.
Okay, so your next stage was East Oaks. Tell us about how you were introduced to that school and what your role is there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Well, Michael, I saw that they were making, starting East Oak stuff and the video stuff, and Michael just kind of reached out before I went to Odd Nerdrums.
Michael Klein, right?
Yes, Michael Klein. And he was saying, I might have an opportunity for you. I might have something, but I'll be in touch soon. And then, like, as this just eager painter, I'm like, okay.
He's torturing you.
What is it? And then months would go by.
Oh my gosh.
I just kept following up, and he just like wasn't ready yet or whatever. And then finally, when I went to Portrait Society, my first time, I think I saw you there. I ran into them, somewhat purposefully, to kind of be like, here I am. What the hell are you? What the hell are you trying to get me? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And so all of the guys were there, and we went out to dinner, and I think they just told me more about it anyway. So they were just looking for, so I wasn't a student. They were more looking for someone who was on the verge of kind of about to making a career, in the verge of like making a career. They didn't want a student that they had to like hold their hand. They just kind of wanted, well, I can't explain what they wanted, but I came as someone who came and painted in the studio, just like as if we were all studio mates. And
so you're an artist in residence.
Yeah, I'm an artist in residence, and I ask questions and advice every now and then, but it wasn't a student-like environment.
Right. Yeah.
Long way of getting to that.
Yeah. And how has that experience affected your career and your painting?
Well, what was really interesting about that was it was the moment I was really thrown into the business side of painting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember when I was going there, I was like, oh, we're all going to be like opening art books and talking about art, and in almost this poetic way that you think artists talk about art, and the model's going to be there all the time, almost like this atelier environment. But then they were having like Monday morning business meetings about, producing videos and how to like sell their work and portrait commission clients and all this stuff. And at first I was kind of disappointed, but then I think, then I was kind of just through being there and hearing everything and talking, just learned a lot about the business side of art, and watched the art. Three artists that were very much already in their careers, how much they had to work, produce, how much stuff they were making and selling that you never saw.
Mm-hmm.
Just all of the aspects about it, as well as the beauty and the creation of it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned off camera that you were leaving soon. So tell us about that. What's the next step?
mhm. So the next step, we are not exactly sure of yet, but Divya, who's my wife, Divya Melaluka, who's also a painter, she's from Australia. We met at Odd Nerdrums, but because of first my solo or no, I forget which one happened, which opportunity I got first, but basically COVID happened when we were supposed to go there and visit her family. So she hasn't seen her family in like 3 years. So we're going to go for an extended period of time, like maybe up to like 6 months. And while we're there, we don't want to be paying rent here, and feels like it's a good time for a next move. So we're completely moving out of here, and then the next step is kind of up in the air at the moment. We will be in Australia for a bit. And I mean, we're not going to just pick a place on the map. There's going to be a good reason to go somewhere, but we're excited to kind of figure that out.
Yeah. Do you have any idea if you'll at least come back to America?
Yes, probably.
Okay. Okay.
We'll probably be, I don't think, maybe living in Australia one day, but I don't think for a while.
Right. Right. And we got to get Divya on the podcast too. She's also an exceptional painter. You guys are some team. Yeah.
Yeah. Her work's awesome.
Yeah. She's great. So you mentioned that when you left Odd Nerdrum, you sort of zeroed in on your personal aesthetic. How would you describe that? What is it that you're after in your work, and what is, as a body of work, what are your goals with your painting?
Yeah. It's a good question. I always think there's like a general, at first, for me, and I feel like with a lot of painters, when you're first learning to paint, you don't really know what to paint, but you know you love painting. And so you kind of just start copying what other people are painting because you're like, I love this. Or even like my still lifes were of palettes and, just painting props. And then you start zeroing out like, okay, what kind of personality am I? What kind of music do I tend to listen to? What kind of movies am I like drawn to watch? Because everyone is so different in those things. And what imagery am I drawn to if I take myself away from the fact that I love painting? Because I could love a painting that's not my aesthetic, but because it's painted so well and I love painting, that just means I'm going to look at it and appreciate it. But what's my imagery? So I just found I was more drawn to imagery that's kind of moody, somewhat dark and moody, but it's not so specific. It's more of a thing that I can feel when I've hit it, when it feels like me. And that's actually really hard to hit because you're like, okay, setting up a model and picking clothes and stuff, and then you just stumble upon it. But then once you start to hit it more and more, it becomes more natural. And I started to maybe make the right choices more often that were in line with imagery that I felt connected to, that was kind of moody. And it's really hard to say what it.
Yeah, I know. I knew when I asked that question, it's a hard question, because a lot of times when I ask questions, I'm like, geez, how would I answer that? And
yeah,
that was a hard one to hit.
No, it's a good question though.
Yeah. Well, so let's go ahead and look at your paintings. So, yeah, I mean, I'm looking at your work. It is just so beautiful. You have a ton of paintings of
Thanks.
Divya in here. I mean, I believe
Yeah,
this
my
is her.
first
This is
show.
her. This is
Yeah,
her, correct? And she's in here,
yeah,
which I think is really a beautiful thing that she's so much part of your portfolio. Um,
yeah.
but you know, one thing that strikes me about your work is how timeless it is. You know, I look at you and you're
Oh,
like
thank
a
you.
hip
Yeah,
30-year-old. How old are you now? Somewhere around 30?
29. Yeah,
29. So, you know, a hip young guy, and yet your work is like, I'm not saying it's not hip, but it's like it could have been painted.
right.
It could have been painted yesterday. It could have been painted in the 18th century, 19th century. It's just got this
Hmm.
incredible timelessness to it. And um, are you after that in your work? Are you after creating a timeless quality, or is it just something that's kind of happened?
I would say I am. Yeah, that is actually a good word to describe that I could have used in the last question. I am trying to find something that's timeless and that hopefully won't be dated, in 20 or 50 years, Because there's some paintings you look and you're like, oh, that was painted in the 80s, and I can tell,
Yeah, yeah, they've got a
you
claw,
know?
right? The figures all have the claw.
Yeah. Yeah. The wafta. And so there might be ways that these are going to be dated that I don't even see right now because it looks timeless, but I'm definitely trying to hit something timeless. Yeah.
And yeah, and I mean, what you're doing is different than what I've seen some artists do, though, because a lot of times people, when they seek for timelessness, they're actually hitting on a different time instead of a timelessness.
Yeah.
They're painting figures that not don't just look like they could have been painted in the past, but only look like they could have been painted in the past. And one of the things
Yeah.
I love about yours is that it is truly timeless in that it could have been painted today. You know, I mean, there's somewhat of a ambiguity to it that's really
Hmm.
interesting and unique, I think, about your work. And
Well,
how do
yeah.
you how do you arrive at that? I mean, like, let's just take costume, for example. How do
Yeah.
you
Well,
dress your
yeah.
models in order to maintain that timelessness?
Well, I'll first say that y- I usually, like when I'm talking to Divya about this stuff, I feel like I fail when, not that putting myself down, but if I make it look too old fashioned, I'm like, ah, I failed a bit there,
Hmm.
on the timelessness thing that I'm going after. And there are definitely plenty of times where I feel like I went too old with it.
Hmm.
They look too peasanty or something. And so I think it also is from doing that and then correcting it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why does this look so old and peasanty, or, because I do love the naturalists and stuff like that. So there's that, and I will give credit to Divya just has an amazing wardrobe.
Oh, really? It's just there
And
for you.
yeah, because she like doesn't wear pants. It's always skirts and dresses, and she has this style that I have to definitely give credit. That because my first whole show was like basically all paintings of her and all of her clothes.
Hmm.
And so
Wow. So she is
and I
truly
feel
your
like they're
muse, right down to
pretty
her
timeless.
clothes.
Yeah. And
That
then usually other models, I'll be like, Divya, can I use your clothes? I'll wash them afterward. you know.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so this is like just one of her outfits.
No kidding. Wow. You know, there's something really authentic about that though. I mean, I'm all about really being very specific about what I put on my models, but there's something kind of charming and, like I said, authentic about having your muse as be the one that, I mean, you're totally committed to that subject in a way. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of these specific paintings, like kind of where, what the creative process looked like. Let's take this one, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll say for this, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the way my ideas work are sometimes like I want two figures and, kind of light on light, but their hair be one big dark shape. So it's like a very compositional, dark value, light value kind of thought process. And so I think this was sort of an idea of like, oh, two figures leaning on each other. Because I already knew that I like when the figure is kind of contemplating and kind of leaning into themselves or something. And then I was just thinking compositionally about shapes with this particular one. And maybe I'm sure there was a painting that I saw that, had something similar that I thought, made the idea click. But
yeah,
this specific one, yeah.
Is that something you do often? You get inspired by other paintings when you're composing your own work?
Yeah, definitely.
Really? So from a technical standpoint, one thing I've noticed about your work is that your shadows are really transparent, almost non-existent in a way, like you right through here. And I realize that the camera can sort of exaggerate that sometimes. But then your lights are obviously opaque. And that's just one observation. I don't know, you don't necessarily have to comment on that, but I would like to know a little bit about your process and how you manipulate oil paint, what your approach is to oil painting. Yeah, just give us a whole curriculum in an hour and a half. Do you mind?
Well, okay. Well, I first started to learn how to paint very much a Richard Schmid type curriculum. Like I had his book Alla Prima, and I very much followed closely a lot of artists that were inspired by him, like Jeremy Lipking. When I first started, was one of my big influences. And so there was that was very optical, because there's kind of the optical approach and then the conceptual approach that's more like Grand Central Atelier, where they're conceptualizing the light and form. So I started out just kind of copying shapes of color, thinking very much like that. And then I've kind of combined that. I know this doesn't really touch in on the transparency or whatever, but
no, that was just one observation. This is great.
Yeah. And then, so I learned to paint like that. But then once I came, took workshops from Michael and then came to East Oaks and was around all of these, Jacob Collins, Grand Central Atelier people, I started to understand how they conceptualize light and form. And so it's become kind of this hybrid where I'll start a painting pretty optical and just kind of blocking in, almost like a Richard Schmid painting, on a good day when I, and then I will, let that dry and then sort of sculpt out of it, thinking about like the light and form and how the planes are working with the light source and stuff like that. So I like to keep the energy from like the optical block in but then sculpt out of the flesh and stuff.
So one thing I've always wondered about the more form approach that you talk about with the Grand Central Academy, is I would find it very difficult to get good accurate drawings and likenesses with that approach, because you're not looking at shape as much. You're thinking more in terms of form, and shape is really what defines proportion. So do you find that, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but do you find that it's helpful to mix those for that reason as well as others?
Yeah, when I look at some of that work, it's interesting because I like, let's take two successful BCA, Colleen Barry and Michael Klein. They both actually had training first in a more optical training before they went to Grand Central Atelier. And they just so happened to be incredible and amazing. But I do think for me, it very much helps to be able to, like you said, it's like kind of squint down, see shapes, find that very kind of, shapy design, get things right, and then sculpt out of it. If I only had the other way, I feel like it would be very hard for me to finish a painting or get it to look a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, is there a particular painting you'd like to talk about that's meaningful to you in your, oops, I lost your website here. In this group of paintings? While you're thinking about it, I just wanted to point out a still life painting. I don't know.
Yeah.
My gosh, you're so good. Like those peaches look like you just want to take a bite out of them. And it's man, they're so beautiful. And then your flesh tones, it's almost, I keep going back off the website. Sorry about that. Your flesh tones are equally impressive. Just so rich, just like it's like the skin has blood flowing through it. It's incredible. Do you have a particular palette for your flesh tones? I know that it can tell from the pictures, it varies somewhat, but do you have a particular... I know you don't have a formula. It's far too sophisticated for that. But something maybe akin to a formula where it's, a particular set of rules or particular set of practices that help you to achieve good flesh tones.
Okay. I'm not even joking. It's what I learned at your workshop.
No, come on now.
Your
flesh is so different than mine.
It's different, but I mean the same principles in terms of keeping... As you go darker in value, keeping it more transparent.
Okay.
And I try and, as I go darker in value, also use more pure and rich colors. And then kind of, as I crawl up to the light, become more opaque. So there's this play in that. And I mean, you can see in this painting all the little color shifts that that I'm finding, which also alludes to that aha moment I had at your workshop.
Right. Do you weave color a little bit, and then weave it to a point where it becomes more of a smooth transition?
Yeah.
You really do. No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. But it's definitely different than what you do. But there is a weaving happening where you can't just go to one spot and pick a single color. There's just like colors kind of, hatching on top of each other. And
Right. Wow. Yeah, man. I got it. So one day I'm going to take one of you. Do you teach workshops?
Very rarely.
Well, when you do, I want to know about
I just taught one. Oh God, no.
No, I want to take one of yours now.
I'll just be saying everything you told me.
No, because you have you've hit on some stuff that I haven't hit on yet. And like I said earlier, I think your paintings I think you've surpassed me, but even if that, besides what's better or what's worse, there's always something different. Like every artist has something else to bring to the table, and you're mature in your work now, and you've definitely got some stuff that it's like you've taken this path and I had already taken this path, and I would love to kind of know what's on your path and see if it can
Hmm.
redirect mine. I mean, I've said this a million times on the podcast, but this is one of the reasons I do the podcast, is because I want to sort of suck up the powers of every artist that I admire out there. I mean, just to improve my own work,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, you can never learn enough. So you ever see
Yeah,
that, go ahead.
that's been my method.
Yeah. Yeah.
Try and suck every artist's powers just to make something that's mine, you know.
Okay. So one of the things I notice about your work is actually something I noticed when I was at the Met, when I saw a Bouguereau painting. It was the Satyr and the Nymphs. I don't know if I got that title exactly right, but it was on their in a temporary exhibit. Huge paintings, like 12 feet tall, and the women in it, I noticed that their skin was like unbelievably pearlescent and just rich and beautiful. It was I've never seen anything like it. But
Hmm.
you have captured that quality in your work, in your skin tones. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of how you approach skin, if there are any particular principles or secrets that you apply that give that quality that I'm trying to describe here.
I can't tell you the secrets, Jeff. No,
Just give us
first
the
off,
ones that are going to
thanks.
throw everyone off off your trail, you know, the fake ones.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've got them written down. Um, well, first off, thank you. That's a huge compliment. Although there is still something about like Fugaro flesh that looks so creamy, and I feel like sometimes in person, some of my paintings in the light start to feel a little dry. But anyway,
Hmm.
um, so yeah, part of that is, or how I achieve that sort of feeling is I think less about the light and more about the shadows and halftones. So like, and I think I was saying before that I'm pushing beyond what I'm seeing. And I think it also comes a lot from painting fruit from life. And particularly I like a lot of my paintings have peaches in them. But you can see how there's like this weaving of color. So
Mm-hmm.
this weaving of color while still getting the values and form right to make it still feel three-dimensional. And so anyway, I think that helped a lot too. I do like to tell people that they should paint fruit from life first before they start painting skin, especially if they're going to do it from a photograph.
Hmm.
Um, but the thing that I think is giving somewhat of a pearly quality is I really kind of try and find rich and warm colors in my shadows, and then turn out of the shadows with kind of a cool half tone. And then that reaches this sort of light color, but without the richness of the shadow and the kind of cool half tone, the light would probably look dead. And oh,
Hmm.
that makes me remember a lecture that you gave about how all shadows are neutral. It just depends on the light source or something.
Oh, that was the Porch Society. Well, I was talking about,
Yeah.
yeah, I was talking about, and that's true, but what you're saying is you're exaggerating them. You're not following
Yeah.
reality, right? What I was saying that
Hmm.
is that this idea that that if you have cool shadows, or if you have cool light, you have warm shadows. And if you have warm light, you have cool shadows. And I was making the argument that that's a relative statement, that in reality,
Hmm.
the shadows are just the absence of light and reflect the absence of light on the local color. So they're not necessarily going to be different in one light source or another.
Hmm.
But but that's reality. And what you're saying is to make
Right.
pearlescent, I couldn't say that word,
Pearlescent,
pearlescent
yeah.
flesh, you don't follow reality. pushing it
Yeah.
beyond reality.
Yeah. And I don't know if I already talked about this, but there was an artist, John Osorio, I think is his name. He's an instructor on the New Masters Academy website. I did these super, well, it was these nude female figures, and they just seemed to be glowing and pearly, and the shadows were just like rainbow colored and very much far away from reality. But I noticed that the skin looked so pearly and rich, and then I realized if I just zoom in on like just the flesh, it was just, you know, like white or a pale color, nothing interesting, and that it was the shadows that were making the pearliness of the skin glow. So I definitely push the shadows past reality into this kind of warm. And then, I mean, you can see on this one, there's that nostril is just, and inside that ear is
crazy
just
red.
like red. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then there's a balance that you have to do once you put down like a crazy red like that. The balance of like kind of weaving in and out of that chromatic area so it doesn't look unrealistic. So I'm constantly trying to balance the color. So if something is seeming too warm on warm, I have to add cools in there. And when that happens, I'm more just reacting to the painting instead of the model.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and this is the case, even if you're working from life, you're not even copying verbatim the flesh tones, even from life.
Yeah, but yes, I am not exactly copying them. I think it also comes from the way I reach an accurate color, especially in shadows. I tend to do them quite lighter than they're going to end up so that I can layer multiple layers of transparent paint that I can't get that value with just one layer without going opaque. And there's a certain point where I could reach the actual value that I'm seeing in real life, but it actually looks nice, so I stop touching it. And it is actually this kind of warmer, lighter color than what I'm seeing. And so it's almost like I'm going with the intention of reaching reality, but then I reach this place that I like better, and then learning that I've liked that better, I can now recreate it.
Right. Huh.
If that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. I feel like half of the things that I've, you know, developed as habits in my painting were accidents. I mean, maybe an accident's the wrong word, but were just things that I've realized that I like through just experimentation and process. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, so you mentioned this, you know, we're just talking about this, program that I did, the Porch Society, where I talked about how shadows are neutral. But then there's this principle that seems to contradict that, where if you have light, or if you have cool lights, you have warm shadows, and warm shadows, you have cool lights. And you're exaggerating the former, which is cool lights, warm shadows. But my experience is, and tell me if you have a different experience, because honestly, I'd really like to know. If my experience is, it doesn't work in reverse. If you have really warm lights and you cool the shadows way down, you know, and you exaggerate the shadows in that situation, it looks really bad.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. Is that not your experience? Have you ever tried it in reverse?
I don't think I have, but I've seen it. I've seen it done really well in reverse and really bad.
Yeah, I'd like to see it done really well.
So I shouldn't mention who I saw really bad.
No.
But it was kind of like, they would put like a warm, almost lamplight on someone, and then the shadows would be like this blue, and it
like ultramarine or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it looked like the painting was just chalky and weird. But I would say Odd Nerdrum, his paintings it's all warm flesh and then super neutral shadows, but
Not cold shadows though.
it's not exaggerated though. Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm
It's
saying.
like
Yeah.
gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've seen people do, because your shadows are quite exaggerated on the warm end. And the equivalent
Mhm.
of that on the cool end would be almost like an ultramarine glaze, which would
Yeah.
be like, it would be terrible.
Yeah,
And you,
that would look weird. Unless I bet it might work if it was super rich and chromatic and not dry.
we should experiment with that. See if we could be done.
Trying
It'd be
to
interesting.
think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that would.
Do a full opposite palette.
Yeah,
I feel like you would still need cold flesh though. I feel like it would only work if it was like cold neutral flesh and then chromatic cold shadow.
that's what I think. Yeah, so I feel like that principle
Yeah.
only works in one on the cool, light, warm, darks. And
Yeah.
yeah, so to me that's a principle of painting, not a principle of nature. Which works really well.
Yeah.
It's certainly working for you.
Mhm.
So tell me about your
Thanks.
palette. Do you have a limited palette or is it more of an expansive color palette?
Yeah, so I am not someone who sticks to one thing. I kind of
Oh,
jump around and try new things. But so this one that we're on right now, the palette is a bit more expansive. I have like quite a few different reds, some like purpley colors, viridians, stuff like that. And then on the painting of the girl lying in bed, I kind of limited that down. And I only have really one red, and then, but then I have like transparent oxide red, but one chromatic red.
wow.
I don't have any viridian, so I'm mixing the green with just like cobalt blue and yellow ochres and stuff. I took out any, so this one is pretty limited for me.
Yeah.
I think I have my palette. Let me see if we can get this in the camera.
No, that's pretty. I'd say that's more of a average palette, not limited, not
Yeah.
expansive.
Oh,
It's,
but this has the two reds on it. So this is actually the more somewhere in between. I don't know. I kind of took out, this is like alizarin and then naphthol red, and I just replaced that with a Chinese vermilion because I felt like it was right in between those two.
and what are the dark colors on our left? The dark colors. No, keep going all the way down the side.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Everything's
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know.
Well, it's raw, burnt umber, raw umber, black, ultramarine blue.
Okay, so you use black then.
I do, but I almost never touch it, honestly.
Okay, it's just there for that rare occasion.
Every time I put it out, I'm like, because of, I guess, just a color wheel, I'm like, I should have a neutral blue, and I put down the black, but I never end up really touching it. And if I do, it's usually to neutralize something in the lights or halftones. I don't actually use black in my shadows.
Yeah, I kind of wondered if you mixed the greens in this bed one with black and yellow ochre, because it seems like you almost could have. That's why I ask.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it could have been. You know,
I don't know.
remember.
I don't know. I mean, you could have mixed it a million different ways.
I think there's some cobalt blue in some of that. Yeah.
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 Okay, so yeah, here's another one of those lime green ones. It's just so beautiful, though. It's a beautiful color. You somehow are making it work, even though it's yeah. Well, I could be wrong again, but that color that everyone's like, oh, it can't be sold. But gosh, I would own this painting in a heartbeat. It is gorgeous.
Oh, thanks.
Absolutely gorgeous. So tell me a little bit about this one. Is there a concept behind this? Some kind of a narrative?
You know, I'm trying to think the specific train of thought that led me to this. I'm trying to remember.
I mean, it could just be a portrait. That's fine too. I was curious because it almost feels like it implies a little bit of a narrative.
Yeah, well, I always am trying for the most part to reach what I would call a subtle narrative.
Okay.
It's not just a portrait, but it's not so direct as like, you know, a certain scene of something, but that a subtle narrative, something's going on.
So,
So
okay. So would you
yeah,
say you're
I
doing
think I just
portraits,
wanted
but you're doing them and posing them in a way that suggests a narrative that you don't even have to necessarily think about, but it makes it more interesting for the viewer to look at.
yeah, well, there are some where it is more thought out, and then there's some where I'm like, I want a certain mood.
Mm-hmm.
And so for this, it was kind of like this restful, peaceful mood, but I'm also trying to find an interesting pose that isn't so generic. So like the kind of the way that the hands bent and the fingers are, you know, and how her neck is like so kind of crooked down
Mm-hmm.
there. Something that's interesting and creates a certain mood, but not a specific narrative.
So with this painting, did you intentionally mirror the square with this pose?
Oh,
It's almost like a perfect
I
mirror
don't know.
of the square, which is really cool. But then I don't know
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
probably
that's
didn't,
true.
you may not have intended this either, but you did the same thing with the hand. It goes down and then the fingers go perfectly down straight. And then the arm goes down. It also mirrors that square.
I would love to say that was on purpose, but I don't think it was.
Really?
Oh yeah, I didn't even think of that.
Are you
No, yeah.
serious? You know what though? Isn't it possible that again, some of these things are just intuitive, which isn't a bad thing. Like,
Hmm.
it's just you did it without realizing you're doing it, or maybe it
I
was
think
just an
it's like
accident.
because I mean, we tried a lot of poses to
Yeah,
reach this one.
yeah,
And then there was probably something about this one that just led me to this cropping of it.
right.
So it's like you have an idea, but then the model influences it, and then what the model does influences the way that the canvas is going to be shaped, and it
Oh, right. So
is
it was
more like
reversed.
a
So you had a square
collaboration.
model and you chose a
Yeah.
square composition in order to accommodate the square model, not the other way around.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. Huh. Now here's one that feels less narrative, more portrait. Was this a commission or
Mhm.
it was? And how
No, it
often?
was. I was just
Oh, it wasn't a commission.
no. Mm-mm.
No. Was this one in your last show?
Yes.
I wish
Hmm.
I could zoom in because you posted this one on Instagram and you had a detail of the face and oh my gosh, it was unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh,
Unbelievable.
thanks.
And I will say that when I say this one
Yeah.
is more of a portrait, that's coming from a guy who paints portraits. Like I don't see that as less.
Hmm.
It's just less. It's just different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Oh
But
yeah, I can see why. Totally.
yeah, it's yeah, it's beautiful. And this one has warm skin and
Oh
warm
yeah.
shadows.
Yeah.
But that's probably partly because of her race as much as anything, not so much the light source.
Yeah. And it's space, yeah, just cool light, but on a skin tone that's more like like has more pigment to it.
Right, right. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, with this, it must have just been really kind of balancing the cools in the halftones and stuff, although it's not so evident zoomed out like this. This was more of a limited palette as well.
Well, you have really cools in the highlight. It's pretty cool in the highlights. So I guess it is obvious
Yeah.
that there's a cool light source. So it's still the same principle. Yeah, just different
Hmm.
skin tone, but it works so beautifully again. Yeah. So what's next for you? I mean, what's your long-term plan as a painter?
Hmm. Well, I it's funny, like once you get what you were like always going after, was, which for me was like getting into the good gallery and then doing solo shows and selling them out and being good enough at painting that people wanted to take your workshop, stuff like that. Once you get once I've got like those kind of goals, it's like thinking back to the original reason that one starts painting,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is just to keep getting better, and better meaning what you think is better. So what I think is a great artist, I want to just be better at. So I want to improve my skills in drawing. I want to improve my skills in like constructive anatomy so that I can compose more without uh, without a figure there. Just even more fine tune what does Alex want to put out into the world, and also try and make the paintings look better.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that's a pretty broad statement. Make the paintings look better, but you don't have specific goals at this point as to what, I mean, do you have a definition of what is
yeah.
better at this point, or is it just constantly reaching ahead?
Well, I think for me, the specific goals are where I feel like my shortcomings are.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to, if I have a model in front of me and I'm drawing the model, I want that to come more natural and more intuitive to me, so that it's a more enjoyable process.
Right.
Instead of me painstakingly like taking measurements and
Right.
so also making it more intuitive and enjoyable. So in myself, the product might not even look different, but in myself, I am having a better time or feeling more like the artist that I want to be.
Yeah, I'm glad that's a really great point, because I think a lot of artists, I'm going to embarrass my daughter, but like my daughter next to me studying with me, and she, come on in, Addie, show everyone yourself on the podcast. She studies with
That's
me,
awesome.
and sometimes the assignments just aren't fun for her, and that's the case with all of my students. I'm just like,
Mm,
Addie, that doesn't mean you're not going to enjoy painting. It's just that when it's hard, it's not fun when it's hard. It's like I played Little League when I was a kid,
yeah.
and I could not hit a freaking baseball. That was a sport I never could figure out, and I hated the sport. It had nothing to do with the sport. It had to do with that I wasn't any good at it. Um,
Yeah.
so there's really something to the joy you feel once you start to master something, and it's this lifetime pursuit to
Yeah.
reach that
And
ultimate joy.
maybe, yeah. And
Yeah.
maybe you never reach it.
No, but it gets better
I
and
mean,
better,
it's
right?
always hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it gets better and better as you get. Yeah, I mean, as you get better at it, and then it's less painful to do it. But so that,
Hmm.
I want to ask you about that. I mean, are there times where you just have to drag yourself to the studio, or are you always just skipping in, all happy with a big grin on your face every morning?
Oh man. No, it's usually dragging most of the time.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, well, not like I'm dreading it, but I know it's going to be hard, you
Yeah,
know.
that's exactly how I
Like
feel.
it, yeah. I feel like if you're doing it well, that's how it's going to feel.
Right.
And if you're or maybe you're doing it bad and it's really fun, and that's cool too.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Not for you though, it's not apparently. I mean,
No.
I mean, I think we share that, is that settling for less than our best is not fun. At least that's not my
Yeah.
experience. But then
No.
neither is
It's like
working your tail off.
yeah, because there's definitely burnout, and especially when I've done these past two solo shows, where the first one I had to make 20 paintings in less than a year. And yeah, I was burnt out after that. And then after this second one, after I did this second one, it was kind of like, okay, I have to spread myself out a bit more. I need to include maybe more teaching or something so that I'm not just, in front of a painting all the time. I need, for quality of life reasons, that's just going into what it's like to be a solo show painter. But yeah, I was getting to something.
Yeah. Well, while you're thinking about it, there was a book that I just started listening to, and I think many of the people listening to this podcast might be interested in this. But my memory is absolutely awful, so I'm going to look it up real quick. But it's So Good They Can't Ignore You. And I may have mentioned this already on one podcast, but it's by Cal Newport. But it talks about how people need to get out of the passion mindset and into the craftsmanship mindset. And he makes the argument that by following your passions, that's not going to bring you happiness, because typically most people, they only have a passion until it gets a little hard, and then they quit and move into their next quote unquote passion. And it's only a passion when it's fun. But anything worth doing isn't going to be fun all the time. So if you want to be really successful, you need to have a different mindset. Instead of chasing passions, you need to be chasing the craftsmanship mindset, which is be so good they can't ignore you. Just find something, work hard, be so good they can't ignore you, and then you're going to find joy in the fulfillment of having accomplished something difficult, instead of chasing a so-called passion that's fun every day, right? And when I read that, I was just like, yeah, that's exactly what I've been doing for the past 20 years, because I don't have fun painting every day. But I do enjoy the fulfillment of having accomplished something that's really hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, same here. And you can always put yourself in check. Like when it's not fun, it's like, well, I could be at an office job, or I could be doing this. That wouldn't be fun either. So at least I'm not having fun doing something I love,
Yeah, and it sounds like a contradiction. It's like at least I'm miserable doing something I love. No, but it's not. It's this weird. It's this weird dichotomy where you do love what you're doing, but you're not necessarily having fun every minute of the day. Yeah, it's weird.
That's funny, because I think I've actually written that quote down, or not even from that book, just like that was my mantra, because when I was first started, because I was very bad at politicking, like becoming friends with the right artists and doing the right contests and showing my face at these places. And because I was pretty like just shy and all this, and I was like, just be so good they can't ignore you. That was like literally what I tried to do. Yeah. I was like, I don't want to get into this because I went out to dinner with the right person or something.
Right.
I want the painting to speak for itself.
And that's exactly why Michael Klein emailed you that day. Right. And exactly why when you came to my workshop, I was like, you were shy at the workshop. And I was like, dude, you are going to be a rock star someday. And it wasn't someday, it was like 3 months later. But you kind of, you kind of shot up like a rocket.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That painting from that workshop I did was pretty rough.
Well, it wasn't, but you were doing something completely different. And that's always going to be challenging. But anyway, so what is your day-to-day like though? I mean, are you there 40 hours a week? When you're painting for one of these shows, that's 20 paintings in less than a year, are you painting like 80 hours a week? How does that work?
Well, yeah, that first year when it was 20 paintings in less than a year, I was so excited for the opportunity that I was just pulling, really late nights all the time, and I just made sure I got it done. But I know that I'm capable of doing that, which is great. I pushed myself to like my limit, but now I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, like this last one, I think I had 2 years to do the whole show.
How many
But
paintings?
usually I actually had less. I had like 16 or 17.
Oh, that's so much better. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but, usually however much time you have, the paintings just fill in the gaps,
Isn't that funny how that
like
works? Yeah.
how long, yeah. So, but my day to day is, I mean, I wake up and I try and get in the studio around like between 9 and 10, and then I'll paint like all day until dinner time, and then that's like kind of my schedule. And sometimes dinner is at 6, sometimes it's at 8, you know. So it's kind of sort of a 9 to 5 feeling, but it's very much like a work schedule.
Right.
It's not just when I feel inspired or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And does it help to have Divya, who's also a painter, painting alongside you throughout the day?
Yeah, sometimes it helps and sometimes it's worse. If we're both having a bad painting day, it's not good.
You
Or
just
if,
biting each other's heads
you
off or
know,
what?
yeah, exactly. Well, right now we're in separate rooms, so that helps.
Okay. Okay.
So there was one time when we were literally right next to each other, and it's like, you hear someone do like a, you know, and you're like, oh great, what's wrong? It's like my freaking painting, and then I'm like, yeah. So but it is really great because you have someone that you can get an objective opinion from, but that also understands what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I always ask her advice, and she's like, yeah, my number one go-to person to know if something's done or if something feels off, or yeah, we're always bouncing off each other.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a cool thing. Very.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. Um, so when you go to Australia, what's the studio plan in Australia? You gonna set up base there? Just bring some portable stuff with you or what?
Yeah, I think we'll bring like basically a workshop amount of painting supplies, like if you were teaching a workshop or
Yeah.
something. And maybe we'll have to just buy some materials there if we want to do some bigger paintings. But we really don't have much of an idea yet. There isn't going to be much space for us to work.
Mm-hmm.
But last time we went, it was we did a lot of plein air sketches, and we sketched each other a lot. And so I'm kind of just excited to do that too. It's just be an artist and go outside and paint and sketch each other and kind of loosen up a bit so that I can bring that energy back to the studio after a few months.
Do you think you'll get inspired by the Australian landscape?
I mean, I did last time we went, I did some landscapes, and it is pretty cool because it's so like dry and open. And where we are here, I think maybe you were saying this, that Addie felt this about when she was in North Carolina, how it's like there's so many like tall trees and everything, you can't see far out.
Yeah, Addie did say that. Yeah. Because Utah's not like that at all. You see forever.
Yeah, I think Australia is a bit more like Utah in that way. I feel like you can just look out forever. Specific areas, obviously, but so that will be nice and inspiring.
Yeah.
And I like the colors that the dryness brings, and not so chromatic and lush.
Yeah, really beautiful earth tones. Yeah, Utah's got a lot of
Yeah.
great landscape painters because of that. I mean, the Hudson River School was pretty awesome, but I feel like it's really so much easier to come up with beautiful compositions in the West. And I would assume Australia is similar, where you have all these beautiful browns and ochres and oranges and greens, and instead of just green, 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 everything's green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
green on green.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what you come up with. I mean, because you've got some beautiful works here with like figures in landscape. And I mean, I'm not trying to encourage you to do anything in particular, but it'd be interesting to see if you came up with anything unique to Australia with the figure in the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I should.
You should try and get a crocodile in one of them. That's my only request.
Yeah.
And if you can pull that off, I would be.
All right.
Yeah.
Not a kangaroo?
Yeah, kangaroo would be nice too. I'll accept kangaroo.
Okay. They're a bit more accessible.
Yeah, and a little less dangerous. All right, so now one last question I have for you is, you know, you did really, I mean, you've said a couple of really insightful things today. I mean, one, which was great to hear as an artist who struggles to always find joy in every minute of painting, and that you struggle with that. Two is that your mantra was be so good they can't ignore you. You know, those right there are two things that I would think would help any artist who's trying to make a living in this. But what else would you share with an aspiring artist who wants to make it in this field?
Yeah.
What piece of advice?
I think one thing that really helped me is, and it's so simple, but stop looking at living artists and start looking at dead ones.
Really? Okay. Why is that?
Yeah. I think one, because I think that a lot of painters that are trying to make it are looking at a lot of living artists for their inspiration, because that's what I was doing. And I mean, those people are alive to teach you, so that's good. But you start, I don't know, there was something, I was getting the critique all the time. I think even I got a critique from you when I was at your workshop, and Michael, and I think even I showed my work to Garen Baker during your workshop, and it was like, you know, it's looking good, but it's a bit too much like this artist, you know. That artist already exists. And there was something once I started shifting into looking at, you know, paintings I loved from the past in terms of inspiration for how to paint and what to paint. Something just clicked a lot more naturally and felt a lot less, you know, derivative of something that's already being made today.
Oh, okay. So
that's a super just practical thing.
Yeah, which we all need. Yeah, I think that's excellent advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, it was great talking to you. Really was. I'm I'm a huge fan. So thanks for doing
so much,
the podcast.
Jeff. The fact that I, you know, was once in your workshop and now you think I'm worthy of even asking to be on this podcast is such a cool full circle moment. So just thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, no problem. You became so good we couldn't ignore you. That's how it went. All right. Thanks, man. Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.